for those of you who've heard some of this before, it's great. For those of you who haven't, this will be kind of like the fire hydrant version of what's happened till now. Okay, so before we get into as we get into this, let's remember that we have different sections to it. It's a revelation of Jesus Christ. So it's a revelation from Jesus, and it's a revelation about Jesus. And what God is wanting to do here is He wants to give us, in this section, a picture of the flow of history that will bring us all the way home. Okay? From about the time of Christ all the way home. So let's go ahead and take a look at Revelation chapter 12. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. As she was pregnant, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 crowns, and his tails swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and hurled them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. She gave birth to a son, a male, who is going to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to His throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they did not prevail. And there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of His Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down, the one who accuses them before our God day and night. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. And they did not love their life even when faced with death. For this reason, rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you with great wrath, knowing he has only a short time. Now we're going to pause on this, and we're going to walk through this, and then we'll finish off the rest of it and get some headway. So here we go. The fact that there's a, first of all, what we're reading a kind of, and by the way, just letting you know, Carl, that I got 2 more kids on the way. So, all right. So here it goes. This is called Jewish apocalyptic. It is something that came into usage somewhere around the 6th and about the 6th century BC. Somewhere in that range, all right? And you would include maybe 6th or 7th century. We can go as far back as that. So that would be in the 600s and 700s BC. One of the oldest apocalyptic writers that we have would be the prophet Ezekiel. So he would be the first one that I'm aware of. And then you have people like, say, Zechariah. He was an apocalyptic writer. A little farther in, Daniel was using something called Jewish apocalyptic. The word apocalypse means to look behind a curtain, to have a curtain pulled back and be able to see behind it. And so it's God unveiling something to you. The apocalyptic literature uses highly metaphorical but meaningful, incredibly rich imagery. So it's a beautiful form of art. This does not mean the Bible is predicting these beasts. These are images that represent and symbols that represent very concrete realities. So if you just look at every one of these words as a concrete reality, you would be missing it. All right? So what we want to do is see how it expresses itself. A Jewish apocalyptic literature uses those symbols consistently. Horns typically mean powers throughout the, sometimes rulers, leaders, or some kind of power that you would have throughout all of apocalyptic literature. Beasts typically represent governments and sometimes the leader behind those governments. So what we want to do is understand how the Bible, in its apocalyptic sections, uses apocalyptic imagery, and then we can unlock what it means. Okay? So with that in mind, let's go back and take a look. We have this great sign, that word semeion, sign in Greek. What it means is an attesting sign. It's something that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, you're only maybe this far removed from the return of Christ. It may be something that kind of gives you some kind of signal or authenticates something. So for instance, the military uses attesting signs. You would have a password. And let's say you're walking in the dark and all of a sudden you hear a gun, load, and someone yells, password. And you're trying to think, what was that password you're supposed to say? And you're supposed to say, New York Yankees or something like that, right? And that's the password for the evening. So that would be an attesting sign. So this is a sign not to tell you that Jesus is about to return or something like that. It's a sign that God wants you to see. And he says, when you see this, you'll know I'm in control. Okay? So it's that kind of sign. It's a sign that tells you you're in a season that is approaching the return of Christ. So it's that kind of sign. It says, the sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with a sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. We know from Scripture, from the book of Hosea, for instance, and from the, I'm just going to get this ready here, and from, say, the book of Ezekiel, chapter 16, and from other portions of Scripture, that Israel is oftentimes referred to as a woman who is married to Yahweh, to God. And that marriage took place at Mount Sinai, where there's this covenant, a marriage covenant between God and his people, where the people really struggled with it. So I want you to believe or see with me that this woman who appears in heaven is Israel. The reason she appears in heaven is because she is to be conspicuous or visible to the whole world. So this is something that anyone living anywhere in the world can reference. The Jewish people. Who doesn't know about the Jewish people? Even though they're a fraction of the population, their history has sort of been on display for the whole world to see throughout time. So, she appears in heaven, a woman clothed with a sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. We learned from Genesis chapter 38, I believe it was. Let's take a look real quick there. That this represented, it might have been a little bit earlier. Let me just see, is it? Let's come over here. I think it is chapter 30. Is it 38? 37. What we're looking at here is that Joseph shows us what this is. It's chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. I was off by one. And Joseph has this dream. So here's a great example where we can see what this whole thing represents. He had actually two dreams. One of them he saw sheaves of grain bowing down to him. And then the second dream, this is before he'd been betrayed by his brothers. In verse 9, he has this other dream. Let's take a look at it. Chapter 37, verse 9. Then he had yet another dream and informed his brothers of it and said, behold, I've had yet another dream. And behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. He also told it to his father as well as to his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you've had? Am I and your mother and your brothers actually going to come to bow down to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him and his father kept the matter in his mind. So why 11 stars? We know because he's the 12th. He's one of the great 12 tribes of Israel. So now we know that the stars, the 12 stars, represent the 12 tribes. The sun he's clothed in the sun. That means he's clothed in the covenant that God had made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's his dad. So he's clothed in the covenant of not he. This woman that we're reading about over in Revelation is clothed in the covenant God has made to Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the glory. The glory of the covenant is what Romans calls it. So she's clothed, got to get these pronouns right. She, the woman in Revelation, is clothed in the covenant God made to Jacob. And she's standing on the moon. So she's established on the foundation of Leah and to some degree Rachel, but mostly Leah. So that's the moon. So this is Israel. There's the 12 stars, 12 tribes, clothed in the covenant of Jacob, standing on Leah, the wife of Jacob, that coming up from that. By the way, which is very interesting. So she's kind of rooted in Leah or in Rachel. Those are the two wives of Jacob. So why is that important? I did a little bit more research, so I'm bringing some new stuff. If you want to go to Israel and declare yourself a Jew, you have to establish your Jewishness through which side? Mom or dad? Mom. It's always through the matriarch to come into Israel. So this woman stands on the woman. It's interesting. It comes from that. I think that's what it's pointing to here. So I think that's pretty cool. Anyway, and she is the bride of Yahweh. And she's seen as pure, which is pretty interesting because she's not exactly lived purely before him. But look at how God chooses to see her. Isn't that kind of cool? So anyway, let's come on down. Then she's crying out and being in labor and in pain to give birth. Now what that means is that at the time when Jesus is going to be born, Judaism and the Jewish people in Israel are going to be experiencing tremendous persecution, which is exactly what was going on with the Romans at that time. I mean, they were crucifying Jews every day of the week, oppressing them like they had never been oppressed before. So here's this dragon that comes up. Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon. Remember when we read the word dragon, not to think of a Chinese dragon, which is what you're like, oh, great. I was thinking of a kind of Chinese dragon or a dragon from Game of Thrones. I guess they have dragons. I've never actually watched Game of Thrones. But, if you think through literature, we have a dragon that kind of comes more from either Nordic mythology or from Eastern mythology. But this is actually coming from Middle Eastern imagery. And so that's not a dragon. Think of an enormous serpent, a snake, like a massive cobra that would fill up this whole room. That's the kind of, a huge, with coils you couldn't put your arms around. Now you're thinking of a Jewish apocalyptic dragon. So this dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns. So you have this body, and out of it comes these 7 heads. We're going to see, and I need to kind of reestablish with you, that this represents the major political forces that have persecuted the Jewish people since the days of Daniel. All right? And I'll make that clearer for you when we get to chapter 17. But for now, let me just remind you, okay? Remember, I made a mistake last time when I was talking about this. These are not the powers that have ruled over the whole world. These are the primary powers that have had persecuting authority over the Jewish people. So, if we were to go back to Daniel chapter 7, we would have seen 4 beasts. And that's going to come up tonight, hopefully, depending on how fast we go. The 4 beasts that Daniel saw in Daniel chapter 7 were a lion with 2 wings. Then he saw a bear that had 3 ribs in its mouth, and it was raised up larger on one side, like one shoulder was higher than the other. So it kind of looked like, the hunchback bear from Notre Dame, right? So he's kind of walking like that, but he's ferocious and powerful. And then we see that after him comes a leopard that has 4 heads, really weird leopard, and it has 4 wings. It's super fast. And then after the leopard is a beast that he can't describe. It has iron teeth, it is cruel, it is vicious, and it is terrifying. Okay? That's the summation of powers that will come against the Jewish people with persecuting force. Now, if we walk through that, first of all, let me just kind of remind you what those beasts were, because it's going to come into play. Every time Daniel would walk into Babylon, he would go through the blue Ishtar gate, which is really beautiful, and you can see it at the Pergamum Museum reassembled there in Germany, of all things, in Berlin. And that blue Ishtar gate had griffins on the side of it. And so griffins are winged lion creatures. And it was one of the symbols of Babylon. So as soon as he saw the winged lion, he's like, of course, this is Babylon. Babylon the Great under Nebuchadnezzar II was at its pinnacle, and it had become one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world with its hanging gardens. It was just spectacular. It was so spectacular that many years later, around 327 or thereabouts BC, when Alexander the Great got to Babylon, he decided that would be his capital. And he actually dies in Babylon in 323. So right around that period of time, 323 BC. So Babylon is that first one that you see, and that gives you your reference point, because we know what came after Babylon. And what came after Babylon is Medo-Persia. And we say Medo-Persia because it's a combination of 2 major powers. The Medes were the older power, and the Persians were the upstart power, but the Persians quickly became more powerful than the older Median power. And yet they kind of stuck together. And I shared this with you before, but think about America and Great Britain. Britain's the older power, America has become the greater power, and they kind of stick together. But these 2 were even closer. The 3 areas that the Medes and the Persians destroyed were Babylon, Egypt, and an area called Thrace. So they went north up to Thrace, west over towards Babylon, and then west and south over to Egypt. So that became where Persia grew to. Today, does anyone know what Persia is today? No? Iran. So think about Iran just going to the west and taking out the Levant and all the way up into Turkey and down into what we consider Egypt. And then you would have a sense of what had just taken place. So those are the 3 ribs that were in the bear's mouth. Now, a bear is stronger than the lion, but not as spectacular. And that's exactly how it was with the Persians. A stronger nation, but not as spectacular. Raised up on one side, remember I told you about that? The Persian side was stronger than the Median side. Okay? Well, when we get to the next one, we know what's coming. It's the explosive empire of Alexander the Great that comes out of Macedonia under Philip II, and he dies. Alexander comes to power. I think he's 18 years old. Man, we would barely make him a ski instructor, and the kid pretty much ripped the world to pieces. He went after it. There's not been many characters like Alexander the Great. I mean, the dude had it pretty good. Do you know who his main teacher was? Do you know who he studied under? Aristotle. Yes, that was it. I mean, when you're like, yeah, I hang with Aristotle, he's pretty much told me everything he knows. So he's this really brilliant tactician and philosopher. And at the height of his power, he's broken. And so his kingdom goes to a group of 4 generals called the Diadochi. And the diadokoi means successors, the ones who come afterward, are going to split his kingdom up in 4 major parts. The Seleucids, the Ptolemies, the area around Thrace, which is under a guy named Lysimachus, and over in Macedonia, where he originally came from, under the control of a guy named Cassander. So those were his 4 generals. They actually killed his own kid, and they're like, I'm taking this, and another one took that, and they were always fighting each other. So you have this period called the Wars of the Diadokoi. So if you imagine a leopard where the heads are thrashing out against others, but they're periodically biting themselves, that is a lot like what's going to happen, which is just remarkable that Daniel, so many years before this happened, I mean, Daniel's writing in the 600s about something that's going to happen in the 200s BC. It's just shocking how well he gets it. And people go, well, maybe that was written after the Diadokoi. But we have evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls and that the book of Daniel is much older. So, and the language of Daniel represents high Middle Eastern language in Aramaic, taken from Persian and Babylonian court language. This guy's an expert in it. And he knows things about Babylon, and he knows things about who the leaders were there, and he uses terms and language that's appropriate for that. So anyway, it is predictive. So those are the 4 great kingdoms. Remember where they were. Think about everything along the Euphrates River, that's the Seleucid Empire. Anything in the Thracian Empire is what we'd call Turkey today. Okay? Anatolia. And then you have Greece and Macedonia, and then you have Egypt. Those are the 4 major divisions of Alexander's empire. What comes after that? What's that iron power that comes directly after that? It's Rome. Rome is going to come with incredible power, and it's described as having teeth of iron, which is so fascinating because Roman weaponry really perfected the use of iron, as opposed to the Greeks, who had really perfected the use of bronze. And the Roman formations were formidable. The phalanxes of the Greeks just could not stand against the Roman legions. The legions could move and morph and change shapes and in ways that the Greeks had never dreamed of, and they were just outmatched. And the Romans would come at you again and again. And when they established themselves, they'd literally build a camp anywhere they were, a fort. And from that fort, they would just go at you until they destroyed you. Then they just moved the forts forward. So it was a brutal occupying force. And then they would use terrorism. If they told you to surrender and you didn't surrender and you took them on, you better run, because if they catch you, they're going to crucify you or sell you as a slave. So this is truly the most. Wow, look at what you pulled up there. There they are. You can see them on the left. It also corresponds to that image that was in Daniel chapter 2. Great job, man. Okay, so you have some pictures of that. Let's leave that there. Look at how many heads we have, because that's what we're looking at here. We're going to see that this is imagery that is extracted from the book of Daniel. So the lion had 1. The bear had 1, the leopard had 4, that brings you to 6, and Rome had 1. That's your 7 heads. And those are going to be the powers over time that will ferociously mistreat, persecute, and oppress the Jewish people. And they will typically control the area at one time or another. Each of those powers is going to control the area that today we call Judea, Samaria, or Palestine. Sometimes we call it the Levant. Okay? Which is, stay right there, here. That's the Levant. Okay? This up here, just to kind of make it a little clearer, this is Thrace. There's Constantinople up in the Dardanelles. Okay? And there's the Black Sea. This over here with Pella is the capital. That is Macedonia. And this is Alexandria, which was the capital of Greece, underneath Alexander's successors. So the Diadokoi were here. Here's the Seleucid Empire, right here, mostly ruled out of Antioch. Antioch is named after their great leaders, Antiochus, So Antiochus is the origin of the name Antioch. Major city in that time. Okay? So there, here, here, and here. All right? So leave that, because I'm going to totally keep using that. Okay? So what we're going to see is that the way it happened, Babylon has a turn, wrecking the people of God. And then the Persians came along. Babylon destroyed Jerusalem. You go, what did the Persians do? The Persians came super close in the story of Esther to formulating and implementing the first Holocaust. And that was when this guy named Haman rose up and said, we are going to exterminate the Jews. And it came this close. The Jews celebrate the festival of Purim every year to remember their deliverance from Haman's plan to exterminate the whole people. Down in this period of time, when Alexander the Great came, the first major power of these four that had control was here, out of Macedonia. And they came all the way down in Jerusalem and pillaged and did anything they wanted. And then the next one that came was the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid Empire came into action. And so they were constantly coming down here. And every time they came down here, they'd wreak destruction on Jerusalem. And then the Egyptians, under the control of the Ptolemies, would have fights. And they always fought here. So they'd come pushing back up and shove them out. And they'd have control. And then these guys would shove them out, and they'd have control. And they'd shove them back out. So that it just seesaws back and forth. So that Israel just felt like they were the center of the Judea, felt like they were the center of a battle zone. Because they were the center of a battle zone. But the one power that never seemed to have control over them was this area up here, which is called Thrace. Until it's not. See, Rome comes and knocks out all of those powers. First, Rome knocks out these guys, and then it knocks out these guys, and then it knocks out these guys. And now Rome's taken over all of this, so much so that they referred to the Mediterranean Sea as our lake. They liked it. I mean, so they had knocked out, over here, they had knocked out the Carthaginians. That was their last major opponent. So pretty much they had power over everything. In 476 AD, Rome is going to fall. It collapses, and then you have Augustine writing The City of God, just before that he writes, everyone could see Rome was about to collapse. So in the 400s, they're already saying, what happens after Rome finally falls and doesn't rise again? So Rome's going to collapse. But there's a seventh power that is going to rise. Remember, there's 7 heads. So Babylon had fallen, Medo-Persia had fallen, 3 of the Greek powers had fallen, Rome had fallen, but what about this one? Right here. What do we call that? It's going to last until 1053. No, sorry, 1453. I'm trying to get my dates right. It's going to last. At 1054 was when they had the Great Schism, and but it's going to last until 1453. Okay, that date is dead on. What happens in 1453? What power fell? The Byzantine Empire, which is right here. Right here. The Ottomans will take them out. But before that, think about it. They have lasted for almost another 1,000 years beyond the Roman Empire. So what Rome did under Constantine said, we need a more central capital for our empire. And so he moved the primary capital from here to here. So when Rome falls and the Western Empire collapses in 476, the Eastern Roman Empire is still going to last for almost another 1,000 years. All right? So, what's so big about that? Well, here's the deal. Within a short period of time, they stop speaking Latin and start speaking Greek again. So they become a Greek force. This is the final entity, the final head, not on the Roman beast, but back to the Greek beast. It goes back to it. So you get your final period of time. And the Byzantine Empire will control Jerusalem and Judea until the Ottomans take it from them. All right? Any questions about that? Those are your 7 heads. That's it. So when you look at this demonic being, and that took a long time, these 7 heads and 10 horns are talking about those 7 heads taken from Daniel. And the 10 horns, we'll get to them later. They don't have crowns yet on them. The crowns are on the heads, and not on the horns. That's going to be significant. So we don't know who they are yet. We'll get to that in the future. His tail, back to verse 4. This is Revelation 12:4. His tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and hurled them to the earth. This is going even farther back into Satan's history, when he caused 1/3 of the heavenly host, that is to say, of the angels, to fall into his deception and follow him out of heaven. Okay? So that represents the angels who fell. He hurled them to the earth. 2/3 apparently stayed with God. 1/3 went with him. And it's in his tail because it's saying it's deep in his history. The dragon stood before the woman. So here's Satan with those mighty powers that we looked at. Through them, those are his main agents, okay? Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the Byzantine Empire. Those 7 primary powers will be the forces through which demonic power will come against the Jewish people and the people of God. So, he stood before the woman, that's Israel, who's about to give birth, that's Jesus, so that when she gave birth, he might eat her child. So that tells us that there would be an attempt to exterminate Jesus at the moment he was born. Well, we go back and we see a client king of the Jewish people, a guy named Herod, who came out of Idumea, which is in the south, and had married a Jewish princess and claimed to have converted to Judaism so that he could become the king of Judea. There's a whole group of people called the Herodians who started saying that Herod and his lineage were the true expressions of the Messiah. When you read about the Herodians in Scripture, they were people saying, why can't Herod be the Messiah? So he builds those amazing stones of the temple. If you go to the Temple Mount, you see those massive stones at the western wall. That's him. He built the city of Caesarea. He's just an incredible builder, but a horrible human being. Okay, so he's under the control of Rome. First, he was not a patron, but he was a beneficiary, kind of a client. That's the word I'm looking for. He was a client to Mark Antony, and then when Antony lost, he came and became a client to Octavian. So he tries to kill Jesus. That's why all the children in Bethlehem who were under the age of 2 were killed. So he's talking about that. That was his attempt. She gave birth. Hey, Carl, can you turn down the heat while you're out there on both sides? Could we turn down the heat a little bit on those 2 sides? Okay. She gave birth to a son, a male, who is going to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. It means that someday in the future, this child will have absolute control, that nobody will be able to withstand his judgment. Nobody will be able to come against his power. That is Christ. That's Jesus. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So that's the ascension. After his birth, he's going to be caught up to the throne of God. Now this is where it gets interesting. Then the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. So I've done some more research while I was sick and looking at this. Part of the reason we're looking at this again. Plus you guys are here, so it's kind of fun. Am I losing you too bad? Okay. So the purpose of this wilderness, it comes from Hosea. I want to show it to you. Let's go back to Hosea. Here we go. It's the first of the minor prophets, so it's Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea. Okay. And it's really early here. And he talks about how he's going to bring her back. Let's see if I can find it. Let me just check real quick. Just a second. It is Hosea 2, verse 15. So let's just go ahead and look there. So he's talking about, we'll start in verse 14. Therefore, behold, I'm going to persuade her. This is Yahweh, God, talking about the Jewish people. I'm going to persuade her. Bring her where? Do you see it in verse 14? Bring her into what? The wilderness, and speak kindly to her. Isn't that interesting? Then I will give her vineyards from there, and the valley of Achor as the door of hope, and she will respond there as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she went up from the land of Egypt. And it will come about on that day, declares the Lord, that you will call me my husband, and no longer call me my Baal, my master. Okay, so he's going to change his relationship with her. So he's going to bring her back into the wilderness. So the wilderness describes a place of desperate need and dependence. So God is going to reduce Israel to a place where it is in desperate need and dependence. Dependence for food and provision, dependence for protection, dependence for compassion. So you can see that God is taking Israel straight away after this into a season where they're going to be in a wilderness period of time. Furthermore, he's ultimately going to bring them to the wilderness, and this is what got me so excited. When the Jewish people came back to Palestine around, let's say, the idea for it to begin started in about 1881 under Theodor Herzl, and then by the time you get to 1909, they've formed the first city, which is going to be Tel Aviv. All right, what do you think Israel was like when they came back? It was deforested. It was full of malarial swamps. It was a wilderness. It was how they found it. And if you talk to Jews today, they will be very excited to tell you how they turned the wilderness into a garden. And they did it through drip irrigation and all kinds of really creative systems to learn. Literally, drip irrigation comes from Jews who were trying to maximize water usage for irrigation. And they planted trees everywhere, and they drained swamps, and they started doing proper crop rotation and restored the quality of the land. So when they came back to the land and they were trying to buy it, they bought it pretty cheap. It was like buying swampland in some sense in Florida. And so a lot of the Palestinians who were living there were happy to sell. And then as they improved it, obviously hearts kind of were like, hey, you took that from us and now it looks really good. And they've continued to improve it. So the forest in Israel and all the productivity of the land and the usage of water and desalinization have transformed this place from a wilderness to something quite different. So when God talks about bringing them to the wilderness, taking them to the wilderness, it's a wilderness experience. And I believe he's talking about bringing them back to Palestine. Because it says, where she had a place prepared by God. And I think that is this place that God has always prepared for the Jewish people. And it's astonishing. No people group has ever been removed from their land and then brought back to their land. And then we have some really sad stories about that. Think about the Cherokees and the Trail of Tears and how they got dispossessed. And they get to Oklahoma and they're like trying to get their footing there. And then they're like, oh, there's oil there. Move them again. Right? So there's this tragic removal of people. When people get separated from their native lands, a lot of times those people groups fail and falter and disappear ultimately. The Jews have been removed from their land on three primary occasions. And if you go back, you could see where during the days of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, especially under Jacob, they had to leave that land, and then they went to Egypt, where ultimately they were enslaved, but they make their way back to the land during the story of the Exodus. And they stay there until the days of Babylon, when they are again removed from their land and dragged off to Babylon. But 70 years later, they start migrating back to the land. You have the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah. And then you go, what happened after that? Well, in the days of Jesus, after the crucifixion of Christ, God removes his protection, and then Rome, who, remember, they said, we have no king but Caesar, we want Caesar. God let them have Caesar. Caesar comes to them, and same script, rips them away from their land. 2 major wars, one in AD 70, and the other one in 132 through 135. So the one was AD 70 to 73, and the other one was 132 to 135 under the Emperor Hadrian. By that time, they had been completely removed from the land and entered into what they call the diaspora, where they're just scattered throughout Europe. Some of them are scattered in North Africa, and they start migrating to the farthest parts of the world, including the United States, which until very recently had more Jewish people in it than any other country. Off in Russia, you have the pogroms of the czars. You can sort of see Israel's scattered. This lasts until they begin making their way, migrating back in the early 1900s. And by 1948, on a single day, which was May 14, 1948, Israel became a nation again, exactly as God prophesied. It's not even as old as my dad. They've come back. God had brought them back to the place He prepared for them. And so while they're out there wandering and facing extermination and persecution, which is exactly what the Bible said they would experience. See, as soon as the dragon could no longer attack the Son of God, he turns and begins attacking the Jewish people. So ever since the ascension, we've seen an unending attack on the Jewish people and on Jewish culture all around the world. The Dreyfus affair in France, the pogroms in Russia, the Holocaust in Europe and Germany. Even the Spanish Inquisition before that in Spain was primarily directed against the Jewish people. So there's this constant onslaught against them. John predicted that. He said that's exactly what's going to happen. But don't be afraid, because God has a place prepared for them, the same place He's always had prepared for them, and it's going to be in the wilderness. Anyway, they're going to be nourished in the future there for 1,260 days. All right, back to verse 7. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they did not prevail, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. So that war in heaven, Michael is the one who is the primary leader of the heavenly host. He is the warrior leader of God's angelic beings. So you have 2 great angels who are symbolized on the Ark of the Covenant. They're the covering cherubim, closest created beings to the presence of God. So if you saw the cherubim, if you ever saw the Ark of the Covenant, you ever come across that, maybe you saw in Raiders of the Lost Ark, you have those 2 angels, and they're like standing on both sides, right? It's really cool design. And they represent Michael and Gabriel in Jewish thinking. Those are the 2 archangels, the highest angels. They're also called seraphim or cherubim, 2 covering cherubim. Seraphim is a description of their fiery appearance. Anyway, so he's waging war. The dragon, that's Satan, who used to be the highest angel and who fell from that position, is the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they did not prevail, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan. The devil and Satan are 2 words that mean, just come on down here just a second. Satan means adversary. And the devil, I believe, means slanderer. Okay, so you would have, I want to make sure I get that right. It is diabolos, slanderous, accusing falsely. So he slanders, and he is the adversary. So this is the Satan. Remember, the words devil and Satan were not originally names. They were descriptors of a being. Like God doesn't even use his name. I don't actually know what Satan's name is. We call him Satan, but Satan just means adversary. So anyone who is an adversary can be called a Satan in Hebrew. Anyway, he deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down, the one who accuses them before our God day and night." So from this point on, from right here on, Satan no longer has the ability to accuse us in the presence of God in heaven. Well, you go, when did that happen? And we know when that happened. That happened at the cross. Because prior to the cross, from when Adam and Eve fell, all the way up to the cross, Satan was called the god of this world, the prince of this world. And so when Jesus encountered him on the third temptation, which is found in Matthew chapter 4, he actually takes him up to a very high mountain. We actually think like Mount Hermon, okay? And so that's in the north. And he has him up there, and he shows him all the kingdoms of this world. And he says, all of these are whose? They're mine. And I give them to whoever I want to, and I will give them to you if you will only bow down and worship me. Now, Jesus doesn't say they're not yours. It is actually Jesus' purpose to take back those kingdoms from him. That's what he's come to do. And so Satan is offering him a legitimate end through an illegitimate means. Okay, I will give you the kingdoms. You bow down and worship me. Jesus says, I'm not going to just get the legitimate ends. I'm going to get it through legitimate means. I'm going to go to the cross. I will take them from you through the power of the cross. Okay? So that's what's happened here. So we know that's the case. Look, we know that before that, Satan had access. You can find it in Zechariah chapter 4, or is it chapter 3? Let me just show you real quick here. You can see what this looks like. Go back to Zechariah, and it is Zechariah chapter 3. And it's right here. Look at verse 1. It says, "Then he showed me Joshua the high priest, standing before the Lord, the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him. And the Lord said to Satan, 'The Lord rebuke you, Satan. Indeed, the Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is this not a log snatched from the fire?' Now Joshua was clothed in filthy garments and was standing before the angel, and he responded and said to those who were standing before him, saying, 'Remove the filthy garments from him.' Again he said to him, 'See, I have taken away your guilt from you and will clothe you with a festive robe.'" So this is a picture of Joshua the high priest being accused by Satan in the very presence of God. We also have the picture from Job where, all the sons of God come from wherever God's creation is located throughout the universe, and here comes Satan. And God says to him, "Where are you coming from?" He says, "From the earth, from walking up and down in it, and to and fro in it." He says, "No, from earth. Have you considered my servant Job? What an outstanding man of faith he is." He says, "Oh, Job. Oh, does he serve you for nothing? Take away the blessings you've given him, and he'll curse you to your face just like anyone else would." What's he doing to Job? He's accusing him. Where is he accusing him? In the face of God, in a council place in heaven. When did Satan lose that prerogative? Well, it's right here. He says he's been thrown down. We see he was thrown down. What had just happened before that? Ascension. Jesus goes up. Satan comes down. He goes up and he throws Satan out. I think that's pretty amazing. So because of our faith in Jesus, Satan has no standing before God. See, then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation," verse 10, "and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down, the one who accuses them before our God day and night. And they overcame him." How did we overcome him? How was he overcome? Look what it says right here. "Because of the blood of the Lamb." When did the Lamb's blood come to be available. At the cross, they were able to cast him, they were able to neutralize Satan's power and overcome him by the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. See, those are the two things that will always crack Satan's kingdom. The word of their testimony is not that they're going around talking. It's the word testimony is martyrios, and it's the word for martyr. So it's the idea that you live and you speak a witness to the faithfulness of Jesus throughout your life so that nobody can deny it. Nobody can look at you and go, it's just like everyone else. So what do you have? These people understand the power of the blood, so their shame and their guilt and their sins are all washed away. And so they have free consciences. And they can't stop talking about it. And they're always living for it. And they're just excited about it. So when you have that combination of living for it and excited about it, and there's substance behind it to refer to, that becomes contagious, and that starts tearing down the power of Satan in the world. He just loses his standing. He can't hang on to people. There's something more powerful than his grip. They did not love their life even when faced with death. The highest form of witness that we have is when we love Jesus even to the point of giving our lives. Saying, fine. For this reason, rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you with great wrath, knowing he has only a short time. When did Satan realize, I am so screwed? To put it, in our terms. When did that register for him? When Jesus walked out of that tomb. He was like, we are screwed. Okay? So now all he can do is a delaying tactic. D-Day is over. Christ and his kingdom is closing in on Berlin. And all he's able to do is just rally every force he can in fierce ferocity, just trying to hang on, because what comes next for him? Hell. Yeah. Yeah, do you see this? This is not scary. This is actually you're supposed to be saying, dude, you have no power. You have no authority. You are defeated. Yeah. We are rolling through. This is supposed to inspire confidence. Do you see how this is kind of like taking us all through the sweep of history? And now you kind of go, oh, that's what that's talking about. That's who the woman is. Oh, that's who the man-child. Oh, okay. Oh, Satan's been cast down. He doesn't have authority. See, when he goes and he claims that you are a wicked person and he throws your sins against you, then here's what happens. It's really cool. It's called the law of the malicious witness. See, Christ has paid for all those sins. So you stand as though you'd never done them. Those are not truths about you if you've received the blood of Christ. So when he says, oh, that guy's a liar, and that one's proud, and God says, those sins are paid for. You are false accusing that person. Do you know what happened to a malicious witness? The malicious witness who tried to weaponize the law in order to get you injured by the force of the law, okay, who accused you of, accused that person of rape, and that, say, a rapist was to be put to death, and then they found out that that person actually was not a rapist, then the person who accused him of being a rapist was given the penalty of a rapist. So everything that Satan accuses us of, if it's been covered in the blood of Christ, it no longer exists. Christ has answered it, past, present, future, full and free. So that all of that, so God says, that's not true. You are a malicious witness. And that takes all of the penalty of hell and increases it upon Satan himself. That's a terrible thing. He has no standing before God. He can't even stand there and make the case. And when he does make the case, he's a malicious witness. Okay. When the dragon's side is thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. Let me just ask you, after the cross, has there been an extensive history of anti-Semitism? That's exactly what John said would happen. What nationality, by the way, was John? Jewish. He's talking about his own people. This is not Christians talking about Jews. This is Jewish believers in Jesus talking about their own brothers and sisters. So he's saying, hey, guys, get ready for this. Understand this. The rest of the history of the world will be a history of anti-Semitism. Now, the Bible is going to predict that as we get closer and closer to the return of Christ, anti-Semitism is going to reach another level. What do we see happening across this country and across Europe? Something we had thought we would never see after the 1930s. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. And people are actually celebrating with kafifas and Hamas chants the cause of rapists and murderers, people who purposely target civilians and children. It's horrible. And I'm not saying the Jews have all been perfect, by the way. The Bible doesn't teach that either. But this is an increasing anti-Semitism. As Satan sees himself getting closer and closer, he knows those are God's kids. And good, bad, or ugly, he wants to do everything he can to hurt them and harm them and deny them the things God has promised them. And God has promised the Jewish people a place in the world about the size of New Jersey. All right? Said that's theirs. So the powers that come against that are fulfilling this. He began persecuting the woman who gave birth to the male child. Verse 14. But 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for times and a half a time away from the presence of the serpent. So apparently there would be a place that was in the wilderness where God would provide a place for them to go. And I don't think this is talking about Petra or someplace else. I think this is talking about Judea and Samaria. I think it is talking about those swamplands of the 1909 period. And this is Judea restored to them. And it's so interesting because it calls this place, it says, to her place. If you put it differently, it means to the place that belongs to her. It's a wilderness now, but it's still their place. Now, come on. You don't have to be much beyond a 5th grader to go, hey, folks, where is the Jewish place in the world? Every year at Passover, they end it with these words, next year in Jerusalem. And they call it making aliyah, which means to make an ascent, to return to the place that they have longed for over the centuries, hoping that they would one day be restored to their land. God says at the end of time, He would restore them to their land. Nobody predicted that. Nobody except the Bible. The Bible predicted it, and for hundreds of years, people who took the Bible seriously said, someday Israel will return to its land. And that's exactly what's happened. Now, it's going to be there for a times and a half a time. That means 3.5 years. That is still in the future. It's going to be kept there from the presence of the serpent. The serpent hurled water like a river out of his mouth after the woman for her to be swept away with the flood. So here I want to show you something very interesting. What do rivers like this represent in Scripture? Hold your place here, and let's let the Bible interpret that so I don't have to guess. Go to chapter 17. We're going to come right back to this in just a moment. Go to chapter 17. And we're going to see that there's this woman who is sitting on these waters. Okay? She's sitting on waters. A different woman. And I'll show you where it says. Verse 1. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke to me, saying, come here, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute, who sits on many waters. Do you see that? And with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality. Okay, now I'm not going to explain everything to you. I just want to show you what waters in Scripture represent. So you come on down to verse 15. And it explains it. And he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the prostitute sits, and by that way, that's a river. It's the Euphrates in this case. Where the prostitute sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. Isn't that interesting? So I don't have to guess. It just told you. Do you see how cool it is that the Bible interprets itself? So we know that what he tries to do is he tries to pour out peoples and multitudes and nations to try to wipe them out. And the pinnacle of those waters is none other than the Holocaust. From 1941-ish until 1945, there is a determined effort on the part of Germany, by the way, which has rebuilt the Western Roman Empire. Okay, that's, if you looked at the old Nazi map, it's the Western Roman Empire. That's why they had all the Roman imagery and pageantry, including the Nazi salute, which was taken from Rome. All of the Roman standards, the way that you had those poles with the hangings, Rome. Look at a Nuremberg parade, Rome. It's all built to look like Rome, okay? So just bear that in mind, okay? So one of those powers is, once again, trying to wipe out the Jewish people. Rome's on the move, trying to wake up and kill the Jewish people. But what happens? The earth turns against his work. Everything from Russia to the United States and Great Britain, and it says the earth opened its mouth and it consumed the flood that was meant to exterminate the Jewish people. It was meant to wipe them out. His hope at the end of time was just before the return of Christ, kill them all. And God says, no, I'm going to wipe out all the powers that try to kill the Jewish people. Well, let's see. What happened to the powers that tried to wipe out the Jewish people? Oh yeah, they themselves got wiped out. The earth opened its mouth and consumed them. God turned against them. God raised up forces. I'm so glad to be part of a country, by the way, that has, for the most part, stood with the Jewish people throughout time. And when I think about why God continues to bless our country, even though there is so much that we have done that is so rebellious against Him, the one thing that we have done, we were the first nation to recognize the new state of Israel. We have armed them, we have protected them, we have stood by them in the United Nations. But right now you're starting to see United States support for Israel diminishing, and I just fear that when that ends, I can't think of another reason why God would continue to hold this nation as a special place. Because God has made a promise. He says that those who bless the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, He Himself will bless. If you want to be a nation that is blessed by God, bless the Jewish people. God makes that promise in Genesis chapter 12. So, she's nourished. This flood comes against her. That flood seems to go from everything from the Holocaust, from the pogroms of Russia, the Spanish Inquisition, ultimately it pinnacles in the great destructions, and all the way back to Rome, by the way, as well. The First and Second Judean Wars, all the way up to the Holocaust. And that was the big final effort to wipe them out. And it doesn't work. So the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he turns and he went off to make war with the rest of her children, the ones who keep the commandments of God. That means they live under the command of God. Anything God says, they want to do. They live under the authority of God. So God is the highest authority in their lives. Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commandments. Keep the things I tell you. So Christianity can be defined as those who love Jesus and keep His commandments, whatever He tells us to do. He tells us to love our enemies, and we're like, looks like we're going to need to learn how to love our enemies. All right? He tells us that we have to trust in Him alone for salvation and that not all roads lead to God. And we're like, well, okay, that's what you say. That's what we're going to tell the world. And they hold to the testimony of Jesus. That means they just can't stop talking about Jesus. This is Christianity. And what does Christianity come from? You know what we call it today? What do we call the ethic of Christianity? We have another word we use there. Judeo-Christianity. Because Christianity comes out of Judaism. Just as it says here, we are the offsprings of Israel. So as we're getting closer to the end of time, He's tried to wipe out the Jewish people, and now He's just furious with Christianity. Authentic Christianity, not nationalistic Christianity. Real Christianity. And so what you should expect in the world, if this is true, is that after the Holocaust, we would see an era in which increasing hostility would rise against two groups of people, like no one else. Jewish people and authentic Christians will be the bottom of the barrel of a woke culture that hates them all. They'll celebrate Wicca. They'll celebrate Islam. They'll celebrate New Age. But Christian, don't talk to me. Do you see any of that? I think we see an emergence of that kind of unique hatred in the world, primarily oriented against Jews and against followers of Jesus. Real followers of Jesus. So if you're following Jesus, don't expect a parade and flowers. You are the special object of demonic wrath. You are the final target. Those two together. And I think it's pretty amazing. Look at the world today. I think those are your favorite targets. So, he goes, and it says this. I got just 5 more minutes, and we're done. Now I'll take some questions. So he turns away. He's like, this is not working. He goes back. He goes back to the sea. And he begins the process of calling up. At the end of what? We have a timestamp here. At the end of the Holocaust, he's going to be calling up a new power. And listen to it. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 crowns. Look, the crowns have gone from the heads to the horns. And on his heads were blasphemous names. Now, I did some work on blasphemos. That this is such an interesting thing. I got to show you what I got. This is too cool. I took a picture of it from my commentary. Listen to this. Blasphemia. It means sluggish or slow. Literally slow or sluggish to call something good that really is good. And slow to identify what is truly bad, that is really evil. So the highest form of blasphemy is not just to cast contempt on God, which it includes, but when all of a sudden you just can't quite figure out right and wrong anymore. In fact, things that the Bible says are really wrong, you're like, no, that's really good. You need to be proud of that. We need to have parades for that. We need to celebrate that. And then there's things that the Bible says are really good, and they're like, no, that's really repressive. That's really bad. And so there's this moral inversion. And a moral inversion where you start calling bad things good and good things bad is the highest form of blasphemy. And this power is covered in blasphemous names. I believe that the woke culture that we see coming into existence today is a high form of blasphemy. It attacks God. It hates Jews. It puts down Christianity. And it creates a complete moral inversion. And we're watching it. And Revelation says, hello? We told you. I mean, really? It's like, what? I'm pretty moved by this. And the beast, so its heads, it's literally these powers are covered in this moral inversion. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. Did you hear the 4 animals from Daniel? Lion, bear, leopard, weird beast. But here it goes, weird beast, leopard, bear, lion. Why? I just had to get this far. I just think it's too cool. Because when Daniel saw them, he was looking forward through that history. He was living in Babylon, and he says, after Babylon's going to come Medo-Persia, and then after Medo-Persia will come the Greeks, and after the Greeks will come Rome. And this guy, John, is saying, yeah, except we're on the other side looking back. We're in Rome. Don't forget, there was Greece before this, and there was Persia before that. And so he goes backwards. And it's a conglomerate. Now we're realizing that all of these different powers were actually the same power, animated by the same demonic hatred of the people of God and the purpose of God. They are all fronts for the same entity. And he says the final one is going to be like this. This one that he's calling up is going to be based in Rome. But it's going to have the leopard's body, the Greco-Roman philosophy and culture. That's the body. And it's going to have the bear's feet. It's going to have the occupation power and the staying power and the oppressive power of Persia. And it's going to have the demonic ferocity of Babylon. And it's all going to be in one. All right. What power began rising after the Holocaust? And I'm going to share it with you. Okay. Yeah, they came after. Actually, they were before the Holocaust. They did come to power, but there's an even newer power that starts over here. See, Daniel said that somewhere during the feet of the image at the end of time, this would come and become a power once again. Bang. Absolutely bang. The European Union is the first time since the fall of Rome in 476 that we see the most ferocious entity coming together again. So what is the culture like there? Oh yeah, Greco-Roman, right? And by the way, anytime they pass a decree, come on guys, guess where they deposit the decree? Where are all European Union decrees deposited? You have to have them deposited somewhere. Ours would be all deposited in Washington, D.C. You want to guess? Rome. They're not kidding. They know that they're rebuilding the Roman Empire. That's the point. They're excited to have the first time in history where one currency goes all the way from up north all the way down through the south, and they're hoping to continue growing it. Now, the Bible taught in the feet of the image that it would be unstable. It would be a combination of very strong nations, the iron, and very weak nations, the clay. And they wouldn't want to hang on to each other. So we see rumblings like Brexit and that. But they're fighting and pulling it together. Henry Kissinger once asked the question, who do I call if I want to talk to Europe? It was a kind of a joke. It's all fragmented. When you look at Europe today, it's the fragments of the Western Roman Empire that collapsed. We even have a ditty that we talk about. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Humpty is the Roman Empire. It collapses. Charlemagne couldn't put it back together. Charles V couldn't put it back together in the 1500s. Queen Victoria at one point had descendants who connected to her and unified Europe. So much so that Nicholas II of Russia was cousins with Wilhelm II of Germany. And they wrote to each other, my dear Nicky, my dear Willy. You can actually read their correspondence, and then they tried to kill each other, okay, in World War I. So that's that picture that you see there. They tried mingling themselves. They tried connecting themselves back together. It's all failed again. Napoleon tried to put it back together. The French took a gander at it. Hitler took a gander at it. It always failed until now. And it's coming together again. Okay, that's what I think this is. And it's coming out of the season of the Holocaust. I leave you, I got to show you a couple quotes here. Hang on. You need to hear this quote. I'll leave you off with this. Spock. There you go. Here we go. So, what they're looking for right now, having just, and this is not trying to be conspiratorial, just being honest, what Europe has done is it has finally federalized itself so that there's a superstructure, very much like our federal government superstructure, that makes Germany and France and Belgium like California, New York, and Florida, so that they're states under a superstate. And that has always been the purpose. And they're fortifying that and strengthening it now. If you go to the G8, you'll see that the European president is there, the European leader of foreign affairs is there. Now listen to this, and I'll close with this. Paul-Henri Spaak was the Belgian Prime Minister. He was NATO General Secretary. He was one of the EU's founding architects. His likeness is today on one of the €2 coins, like a George Washington figure in that. This is a quote I have checked. I want you to listen to it from him. "We do not want another committee. We have too many already. What we want is a man of sufficient stature to hold the allegiance of all people and to lift us out of the economic morass into which we are sinking. Send us such a man, and be he a god or devil, we will receive him." We have one more figure to rise. The Antichrist will rise from within this. And that's where we are next. One more. You want to go home with really bad dreams? I just got to show you one. This is what's going on. Okay, this is from David Rockefeller's memoirs. I got it from David Rockefeller's memoirs. Okay, listen to this. Because and you need to see that there's something very intentional that's happening right here. See, Satan's calling up new power to make his final attack. He writes, this is in his own book, "For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents, such as my encounter with Castro, to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalist, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated and global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. That's his memoir. That's what he's saying. That kind of gives me chills. Okay, I know I'm over time, but I got to give you one more. You got to hear this. Anyone heard of a guy named Walter Cronkite? Uncle Walter, head of CBS News for all those years. In 1999, this is on Wikipedia. Just read it on the Walter Cronkite Wikipedia entry. He was given the 1999 Norman Cousins Global Governance Award at the ceremony of the United Nations. And Cronkite said, "It seems to many of us that if we are to avoid the eventual catastrophic world conflict, we must strengthen the United Nations as a first step toward a world government, patterned after our own government with a legislature, executive and judiciary, and police to enforce its international laws and keep the peace. To do that, of course, we Americans will have to yield up some of our sovereignty. That would be a bitter pill. It would take a lot of courage, a lot of faith in the new order, but the American colonies did it once and brought forth one of the most nearly perfect unions the world has ever seen." Cronkite contrasted his support for accountable government, global government, with the opposition to it by political active Christian fundamentalists in the United States. He said, "Even as the American rejection of the League of Nations, our failure to live up to our obligations to the United Nations is led by a handful of willful senators, cost of our nation's conscience. They pander to and are supported by the Christian coalition and the rest of the religious right wing. Their leader, Pat Robertson," not really our leader, but whatever, "their leader, Pat Robertson, has written that we should have a world government, but only when the Messiah arrives. Any attempt to achieve world order before that time must be the work of the devil. Will join me. I'm glad to sit here at the right hand of Satan." Yeah, actually that's true. So the point is this. The Bible makes it really clear that there would be this movement right after the Holocaust to begin federalizing Europe, to begin collecting the world toward global governance, with the end result that Jews and Christian faith will be the primary targets. It's the last move before Jesus comes. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, so much that you know the world we live in before a single day that we are experiencing came to be. And Lord, you sit in complete control of all that is around us. And we look forward to your return. Help us to see this and not tremble, but to feel a faster beat in our hearts as we realize that your return is drawing near. In Jesus' name.